Once again, thank you so much for joining, and we hope you get a lot out of this session. We're so happy that you're here. So with all that in mind, I'm passing the mic over to my teammate, Michael. Michael, over to you.
Lauren, thank you, and welcome everyone. As Lauren said, my name is Michael. I work here at Memberful. I work with all of our customers who are in the trenches every day, trying to figure out ways to grow, ways to retain members, what they can do better and what they can do differently, and where those opportunities may be hiding across the landscape, just to help folks basically realize like what they want their membership to ultimately become. So over the last few years, we've worked closely with a lot of different customers. We've seen a lot of stuff. We have seen the ups and downs of the membership landscape. And over the last year and a half, I think we could all agree that things have been a lot more challenging than they have been prior to that. And if you think about just in the big picture here, the burning question on everyone's mind is that if you're running a membership, how do you not only navigate a period of uncertainty, a period of restricted consumer spending, but how do you thrive in that period? And I'm going to share some information with you here in a minute that my hope is that you come out of this and you walk away with just another tool in your arsenal that you can consider and maybe even think about implementing in your own membership as you think through ways to thrive and grow in the environment that we're in. And just to set the stage here, even though things are challenging right now, there are a lot of winning moments to still be realized in membership. We've seen several customers really navigate this period with grace and with great results. And I'm going to share with you some tools and some tips and a few takeaways today that I think is going to help you do the same. So what we're going to cover, if we just take a level set for a minute, I'm going to go into a case study where we worked with a customer and the customer had a few issues that I'm going to point out in terms of churn, in terms of retention, and how we were able to make a few small tweaks within that plan offering to see big results. I think my hope is that resonates with you. You're going to see some similarities between this customer and your membership. And we're going to talk about just membership in general in a challenging environment. And we're going to talk about how to optimize or how to best optimize your plan offering, regardless of what industry you operate in. We're going to look at price sensitivity versus renewal sensitivity, and I'll explain in more detail as we get into the presentation about what exactly that means. And then ultimately, I'll highlight back to the case study about how all of this comes together to put you on a track to get to higher revenue, which is obviously what we all want here. So let's just start with the case study. We have a customer, we have a group of customers actually where we have tried a few different strategies with. The one I'm going to be talking about today, we worked closely with this customer starting about a little over a year ago, when things started to slow down a little bit, when challenges started to arise. And I'm going to walk you through how a small change helped this customer ultimately see a 500% increase in their month-to-month revenue. Now, if you're like me or if you're like most people, you think about where you are today and you think about a 500% increase in revenue. On paper, it may sound impossible, but as we put the pieces together here, I'm going to lay out the path to actually so that you can actually understand how this unfolds and how it happens. And my hope is that you walk away from this and you see exactly which levers you can pull to hopefully put yourself in a similar situation. So here we go. Just to level set, this is our customer we're talking about. So these are the stats. I'm going to call this before optimizing, and we're going to go into a period in the presentation where we talk about after optimizing. So the before optimized state of this membership, average monthly acquisition was around 33 members. Average plan or the acquired plan mix was about 70% monthly and 30% annual. That just means that 70% of new customers each month bought the monthly plan and 30% bought the annual plan. The average order value for this particular customer was just over $18, and the average churn rate is 8.5%. Now, when you look at this, with fresh eyes, for anyone, regardless of what industry you operate in, 8.5% churn is normal for some people. For some people, they consider it abnormal. Take all of this into account with your particular situation and what it means. If you have a churn rate that's at 12% and you know that that churn rate is likely normal for your situation, that's completely okay. What I want you to focus on here is the difference and the deltas between the pre-optimization point and the post-optimization point and how exactly we did that. So this customer offered a $5 monthly plan and a $48 annual plan. Most of you probably are in a similar situation. We all have our own plan offerings. Some of us may only offer yearly plans. Some of us may only offer monthly plans. Some of us probably offer a mix of those two. But what we did for this particular customer, we took the two plans that existed and we kept the $48 annual plan the same. And we zeroed in on this monthly plan. And the tweak that we made was we suggested to this customer to create a quarterly plan. And I'm going to go into the mechanics a little bit later in the presentation about why we did this and what some of the implications here are, along with the decision of how we determined the price point to set here. But with this change alone, I'm going to show you in the next slide what the effect was after this was implemented. I want you to also keep in mind that as we go through the next few slides that, regardless of what you're offering as your benefits today, keep in mind that this particular customer was very happy with their situation around their existing offering, what the benefits were that they were delivering to members. They were happy with the ongoing month-to-month acquisition. They just felt like there was a lot of value pent up in the membership that somehow needed to be unlocked. And as we go through this slide, this is going to highlight, this is going to be the first part of the highlight, what I'm going to cover in depth later in the presentation. So you can see here in July of 2022, this customer switched from a monthly plan to a quarterly plan and kept the annual plan the same. And what I want to highlight specifically about this customer situation in this chart, this is new acquisition revenue. This is not total revenue. This is revenue from new acquisition each month. And that's key here because you're going to see why in a few slides. But after July passed, you see a huge difference in the acquired value of those members. So what this does, two things, is taking that monthly plan away and putting a quarterly plan in has two net effects here. The first effect is that in any case, if you offer a monthly plan and an annual plan, you obviously are, if you're looking to maximize your cash flows, the ideal scenario for you is likely to send as many people to that annual plan as possible because you collect that money up front. You have more cash flow to work with. You have more cash flow to invest back into your business. So the takeaway here in this table is that these are the numbers I want to break down. That tweak alone allowed this customer to see a huge change in plan mix. So this is key for a couple of reasons. 49% of new customers signed up for the annual plan. 51% of new customers bought the annual plan. That's a favorable shift when you look at the pre-existing mix, because we not only have more people buying the annual plan, we also have the other folks coming into a quarterly plan, which allows this customer to lock in new customers for a minimum of 3 months. So cash flow gets pulled forward. We see 119% increase in the average order value from new acquisition. And then we see the average churn rate almost get cut in half. Now, a couple questions around churn you might have, and we'll address some of these at the end of the presentation. But churn rate, if we look at monthly plans versus annual plans versus quarterly plans, each plan is going to have its own associated churn rate. It's just the nature of the business. But if you look at this particular customer's churn rate, one of the major takeaways here that we see with this customer, and we see it all the time with our other existing customers, is that longer dated plans, and what I mean by longer dated, I mean plans that are greater in renewal frequency more than a month. So I'm talking quarterly plans, I'm talking annual plans here. Longer dated plans have a lower associated churn rate. And it doesn't matter which industry you look at, whether you're a newsletter operator, whether you're a podcaster, that holds true in 99.9% of cases that we see. So how do we use this to our benefit? And how do we take these nuggets of information and put them to work in a period where membership seems to be a harder sell for most people, and put that to work in a landscape where consumers are more cautious. So that's what I'm going to cover next. And what we're going to do is going to circle back to this example a little bit later in the presentation, and I'm going to show you the rest of the story when it comes to what happens for this customer to get a 5X on their revenue. So before I do that, I'm going to level set our optimizing plan mix sections here. So what we're going to cover is I'm going to highlight some of the most common mixes of plans that folks have implemented on their site today. And then we're going to extract some information out of that so that you can see what a very favorable mix of those plans looks like and what the implications are on revenue and overall business health. So if you're like most people, you probably have some mix of the plans on this page. And what I want to do is that Lauren has got a poll for us, and I'm interested to hear of the folks that we have on the webinar today. How many plans do you currently offer in your membership? I want to give folks a couple minutes to answer that, but if my gut's right, I'm going to assume that most of you have more than two membership plans. But I'm going to let you guys answer that, and then Lauren's going to share the results with us.
We're almost there. We've got 13, 14. We're almost there. We've got two more people we're waiting on, and then we'll go ahead and end the poll and show the results. Almost there. One more person, and then we've got them. All right, we've got almost everybody, so I'll go ahead and end the poll and share the results.
Okay, great. So this is very much in line with what we see across the board. So 53% of you have more than two plans, and there's about 13% of you that have just one plan. And the rest of you fall in the middle in the two plan bucket, I'll call it. So this is interesting because this is exactly what I had hoped would be the case today, because we're going to talk about where the opportunity lies based on, number one, how many plans you're offering, and number two, what the structure of those plans are. So if we go back to what's the winning mix, that's like the $1 million question here. What is the appropriate mix, and what mix maximizes revenue? What mix maximizes retention? And what mix ultimately will bring my churn down to the lowest possible level that can be? So one of the things that's very, very interesting here is if we just look at the average conversion rate, regardless of how many plans that you have, we always see the highest conversion rates on sites that offer two plans. That average conversion rate against the pool of customers that we work with typically falls out around 4.9%. And naturally, it dips off as we get to three plans and four plans and onward. And there's a lot of reasons for this. And certainly the goal of this webinar isn't to explore what the core reasons of that is. But in general, two plans is going to do two things for you. And this is why you see that higher conversion rate coming through. You get to bridge the commitment gap. So for anyone that's maybe a potential customer that's on your site, whether they know who you are, whether they're just introduced to your brand, I call it a commitment gap. And having two plans is going to address this commitment gap in a way that says, hey, if you want to become a monthly member or you want to become an annual member, if someone doesn't know who you are, they're likely to give you a shot at become a monthly paying member, and they just may be testing the waters. They may just want to see what the membership entails before they commit. So when you have one plan, it's not necessarily a harder sell, but what it does is for a potential member, it puts your potential member into a scenario where they have to come to terms with committing for a year, maybe even if they're not necessarily ready to do that. But when you put two plans in the mix, you suddenly have a way to incentivize the adoption of longer dated plans. So for example, if you have a monthly plan and you have a savings that you implement on your annual plan, obviously most of us probably have seen the case where you can sign up for an annual plan and save maybe 20 to 25%. That's very typical across the membership industry. But what I'm most interested in talking about today is capturing two ends of the pricing spectrum. And what I mean by that is that capturing that end of the spectrum for customers who may not want to commit to a year, and then also capturing the other end of the spectrum where folks are comfortable committing to a year and maximizing that value along those 2 points. And that's what we're going to talk about on the next few slides. So I'm going to zero in on something that I get really excited about when I look at our customer base, what they're doing today, and what they maybe could be doing differently to see a huge translation in increased revenue. So we're going to talk specifically about quarterly annual plan structures. So this is an approach where you have a quarterly plan on your site and you have an annual plan on your site. Today, you may have a monthly and an annual plan. You may have only an annual plan, but the following slides are going to speak specifically to a quarterly annual plan structure. So our strategy here that we're going to dive into is quarterly annual and maximizing the member value in each of those buckets. Now, if we look at just the high level piece of this strategy, what we can say with confidence based on not only the last 2 years of seeing what customers have had to do to navigate the landscape that we're in, but over the last 5 or 6 years, that members prove to be the most sensitive to renewal frequency rather than price. This is super important. And if there's a point that I really want to get across today, it's the fact that renewal frequency in and of itself is it's almost like an invisible aspect to the membership that your customer has to overcome. So what do I mean by that? If you offer a monthly plan today, that customer pays you each month. That customer sees that charge come through each month. During economic landscapes that get more challenging, when consumers pull back a little bit, folks become very, very sensitive to renewal frequencies. They love what you're doing. They love the membership. They love all the benefits that it entails. But the problem is, because it's a recurring charge, it makes folks a bit uncomfortable, and it makes folks want to churn a little bit easier than they may would have when things are going great for everyone. So what are some of the implications about that, and how do we deal with it? And when I think about longer dated plans, and when we look at customers who use longer dated plans, what we can say is that we see dramatically reduced churn. We see customers get into a situation where they're automatically able to have 3 months. So for example, let's take a quarterly plan. That gives you 3 months to delight your members. And that gives you 3 months to win them over and deliver so much value to them in that time that they're going to be happy to renew again. And what happens if you think about that contrasted against the monthly scenario that we're comparing some of this to? You know, a lot of folks will sign up for a monthly plan, and a lot of times the first move is, let me go ahead and disable the renewal on the monthly plan because I'm going to try it out for a month before even getting my hands on the first benefit. And when you have a little bit more time to work with, that whole situation becomes, it shakes out a bit differently. And most importantly, quarterly plans let you maximize cash flow, and quarterly plans are also going to help you amplify what your potential customer perceives the value of your membership to be. And to highlight a little bit what I mean by that, we see tons of memberships that have incredible benefits, incredible value that comes out of it. And if you take a step back and you look, a $5 a month plan, even though it screams value, some folks will see, oh, well, this is only $5 a month. That folks often tend to get themselves in a situation where they charge too little on a monthly basis. And it's not uncommon to see folks undervalue their offering, and folks get really nervous when they start to tweak their monthly price, and when they have the need to raise the monthly price, they either get nervous or they maybe even don't even carry through with a price increase because they're scared about what the implication is of that, not only in the near term but long term. And shifting to a quarterly plan hits at some of these areas, and we're going to talk about why. So I'm going to just, if there's something that's high level that you can automatically put in your arsenal of tools here, my suggestion, based off of everything we've seen across the board and everything that our customers have implemented and had great success with, is that if you want to go to a quarterly annual offering, my suggestion is to start with your annual price and cut it in half and offer that as your price for your quarterly plan. So your quarterly plan needs to be priced somewhere in the ballpark of 50% of your annual plan. Now, this is going to do a few things. The first thing we're going to see happen is that by raising the price of that quarterly plan, that quarterly plan is likely going to cost slightly more than what folks are used to paying, but it's going to give you room to discount if and when you need to. So you may not even need to discount. But what happens is when we have a quarterly plan held up against an annual plan, and the quarterly plan is roughly half the price, consumers naturally start to see the value of that annual plan. Whereas in the situation before, the annual plan maybe at first glance felt more expensive or felt like someone has to reach too far to purchase that plan. But suddenly, if you can have a quarterly annual structure, the annual plan value basically becomes amplified, because now we're comparing it from a totally different reference point. So that quarterly pricing is going to drive higher adoption of your annual plan. And in fact, out of every customer we've seen make this move, the average adoption rate increase in annual plans drifts toward about 60%. So that's a massive difference just on its own. If we look at across the board, how do you drive revenue higher without doing anything different in terms of benefits? And how do you drive revenue higher in a period where customers aren't comfortable paying on a recurring basis that's so frequent that they may have heartburn associated with a monthly recurring payment? And the financial return on everything you do to retain a member that's on a quarterly plan suddenly becomes that much greater. It feels good knowing that if you've invested in member retention, that when you see member retention pay off on a 3-month basis rather than a 1-month basis, it makes a massive difference, not only in terms of how flexible you can remain with cash flow, but it also makes a huge difference in how much you begin to think about member retention, because member retention starts to be one of these areas that it's almost there's no proven method for how do I retain 50% more members. You have to find what works best, but member retention is going to be an area where you're going to automatically start to focus on, because the return is going to be that much higher. Now, given everything that I've just talked about, we've seen the quarterly structure, we've seen quarterly annual structure. What I want to cover now is circle back to the original case study that we showed at the beginning of the presentation and talk through how this specific customer realized a 500% increase in revenue on an ongoing basis. So here's our breakdown of this is total membership revenue for the same customer. I showed you a chart earlier of new acquisition revenue. This is total revenue. So total revenue includes new acquisition revenue plus renewal revenue that this customer experiences on an ongoing basis. There's 2 key moments in this customer's journey to the revenue trajectory that they realized here. The first one is that quarterly plans were introduced in June of 2022. And on our chart, if we take a look, if we look at June 2022 on our chart here, you're going to see we had this initial step up in revenue. And that was a product of not only reduced churn, it was a product of higher average order value, and it was a product of a more favorable mix of acquired value. What I mean by that is that we saw that mix shift to a 50% adoption rate of annual plans and a 50% adoption of quarterly plans. So that gives us our first bump. And then in September of the same year, this customer gets to take advantage of the first renewal in quarterly pricing that comes through. This customer has great retention. One of the things that I'll make a note of here is that not only is retention often better with quarterly plans, it's also more predictable. And what I mean by that is that if you think about monthly membership payments, I consider those high risk payments. Those payments are always at risk within 30 days at a minimum. Quarterly membership retention and quarterly churn is way more predictable and it's less volatile. And what I mean by that is that if you zoom out and look at your earnings and you have uncertainty and you have questions month to month about how much membership revenue you may or may not realize, quarterly plans bridge that gap, and they really smooth out that activity over time. And we see that quarterly plan churn tends to shake out to be around half of what it is on a monthly basis. So in September on our chart, we see this huge increase from August, because this customer has new acquisition come through, and this customer also sees more membership revenue come through because of quarterly renewals. And over time, if you just look at before implementation to January 2023, May 2022, this customer's average monthly revenue was around $1,760. And just within 6 short months, they increased that 5x essentially to just under $9,400, and they've gone on to grow more even into the first part of this year. Now, the question that some of you may have is that, when I look at monthly, quarterly off, or a monthly annual offering versus a quarterly annual offering, this is not to suggest that this level of growth will occur indefinitely. But what this does tell you is that going from a monthly plan only or a yearly plan only to a quarterly annual offering is going to take your membership out of a range that you may be used to operating in. So for example, if let's say you have a revenue range of $2,000 to $3,000 a month, and you comfortably know with certainty that that's probably what your average earnings are going to be unless there's some major acquisition event. What we find is that most memberships, believe it or not, have tons of value that's yet to be unlocked. And some of that value lies in where the lever of pricing can be pulled to realize these types of events. And I can tell you that there's about 6 or 7 customers who have had similar results by only taking away the monthly plan option and offering a quarterly option instead of it, and bumping the price a bit so that it's half of the annual value. And this type of result is consistent across the board. And in fact, this particular customer that we're talking about today, this happened in about 6 months. We've seen a couple other customers that it happened in 4 months, and we've seen customers who have had similar results in a year. But the takeaway here is that regardless of what your earnings are today, regardless of what your operating range of revenue tends to be, there's likely value in your membership that can be unlocked, that can put you in a much higher range of revenue on an ongoing basis just by introducing a quarterly and annual structure. And in fact, we have even seen that earlier in the year, as we get into 2023, the folks who implemented this strategy 6 months ago, a year ago, are seeing returns to acquisition that match what they saw back in 2020 and early 2021, and which suggests that this strategy is not only a winning strategy in difficult environments, but it also proves to be a strategy that you can use in just about any environment to amplify that value of your membership. So takeaways here. I know we've covered a lot in a short amount of time, but I talked about this concept of basically unlocking value. And how do you know when there's value to be unlocked? Well, if you look at the typical Memberful customer, the typical membership operator, if you offer a monthly plan and you offer a monthly and an annual plan, there's likely value that's hidden in your membership, where you've got super engaged members and you have leads who are probably enthusiastic about what you're doing, and they are likely willing to pay you for 3 months of membership, almost as likely to pay you for 3 months of membership as they are 1 month of membership. And in fact, what we see is that the question I often get is that how many customers are deterred by taking away a monthly option and replacing it with a quarterly option? And in most cases, the difference in acquisition that folks see is within 3 to 5%. And half of those cases, our acquisition actually tends to increase rather than decrease. So the jump from 1 to 3 months isn't as difficult as having a member consider to buy a membership on a monthly basis against an annual basis. And when you compare quarters to a whole year at a time, that comparison, it converges on itself, and it becomes a much more straightforward analysis, not only for the customer, but it helps you pull ahead not only your revenue those folks are going to bring you over time. It allows you to be nimble enough to invest those increased cash flows during moments where either your competitors or your peers in the space may not necessarily be doing it the same rate if they're operating on a monthly basis. So the part that gets me most excited when we look at what the opportunity is here is that there are so many things you can do when you increase your cash flow, and there's so many places you can strategically plug in and invest during moments in time where other folks aren't doing that, or they're not able to do that. And that's what's going to be, those are the moments when you think about your entire membership journey and your entire trajectory, is what you're able to do in a moment where folks are more uncertain. If you're able to strategically invest in those types of moments, you're going to get much greater ROIs than you are if you're investing in things when growth is really good. So that is the takeaway when I think about all of our customers who have made this very move. Again, we've had great results. What I want to do now is that I want to just shift things back to Lauren for a Q&A. Some of you may have a couple of questions, and I wanted to make sure that we had time to hit those within the hour. So Lauren, what do we have?
Michael, thank you so much for all of that. So much to think about and process, but such great information. I have two questions here. I'll start with one here. We had one customer on the call who was asking about free plans. So earlier on, we did a poll where we talked about how many plans do you have? And he was wondering if, a free offering was included, or that's sort of a separate thing. So like a free registration situation versus an actual paid plan. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that one.
Sure. So, if we're talking about which plans we would consider as being the two-plan approach here, I would say that we would not consider the free registration avenue to be a part of that two-plan approach. And why I say that is basically because if you look at customers who often use free registration, that free registration is often used as a stepping stone to getting someone to convert into a paid plan. And if that paid plan that's put in front of your members that are free registrants, then you're going to end up in a situation where you have those folks' attention and you're able to basically present that same offer to them. So I would not look at any pricing structure and say, just because you offer a free registration, that should count as one of your plans. In fact, best practices in our data suggest that a free registration tier only helps you down the line when it comes to maximizing your conversion.
Thank you, Michael. We've got a couple more questions that came in here. Are there any circumstances at all where quarterly annual splits prove less successful? For instance, for very small or very large communities? And Michael, I'll pop this in your box in case you want a visual of that question to look at yourself. But that's coming in from Jesse.
Sure. That's a great question. So obviously, I would never sit here and suggest that quarterly annual pricing structure is like the existing lever to pull for every single membership. In fact, when I look at the memberships that has worked best for, it's often memberships who deliver some sort of benefit on a regular cadence, like for example, per month benefit as a member. When I think about folks who have shied away from a quarterly plan offering, usually it's a situation where the membership operator, whoever's running the membership, realizes just as much as the customer realizes the fact where you have an offering, and maybe that offering is only needed in a member's situation for a limited period of time. For example, maybe folks come to your membership and they really only need 1 or 2 months worth of access. And that's okay, because not every membership has a large core of super long-term members, and higher churn rates inside of some memberships are just a natural byproduct and natural occurrence due to the pure nature of whatever it is you're offering. But if you have a membership that offers benefits where your customer likely only needs access or wants to consume that content for a very short amount of time, then you're probably going to have a harder time making a quarterly annual move. So my short answer to that would be, as long as you're focused on what the benefit cadence is and how often you drip those benefits out, and if you have members who stick around for 5 or 6 months, then going to a quarterly plan would be a no-brainer. But if folks are hanging around for a month or 2 months max, then I would say that I would not make that move.
Thank you so much, Michael. We've got a couple more questions here for you. Would you convert an existing monthly to quarterly? What are the pitfalls?
Yeah. So, and just for added clarity here, is this a situation where you have only a monthly plan, or would this be a case where we have a monthly and an annual plan? Do we have any more color on that question?
Let's see. Let's see. To the person that asked that question, would love to hear the end. If you have a bit more information,
I'll address it from both tracks. So let's cover both of them, because some of the other folks may have a similar question. So let's just say you have only a monthly plan on your site today, and that monthly plan has been.
Oh, sorry, he has both monthly and annual. He just said.
Got it. Great. Okay. So so for the monthly annual existing approach, I would certainly suggest converting the monthly plan into a quarterly plan, and making sure that the pricing difference between those two aligns to some of the things we talked about earlier in the presentation, where as long as that quarterly plan is roughly in the ballpark of costing half of what the annual plan is, you're going to see you're likely going to see a significant shift in mix of your new acquisition, where most folks see about a 60% shift in increased annual plan adoption just by converting the monthly plan into the quarterly plan with that strategy in mind. So I would say that's a case where it makes sense. What's hard and what will kill your conversion is dropping a quarterly plan in between your monthly and annual plan. I would never, if you're looking to maintain that 2-plan approach or maximize the value, it becomes much more difficult in terms of conversion when you have monthly, quarterly, and annual. So I think the quarterly annual offering, when it's all wrapped up and those are the 2 options available on your site, it's much easier to sell folks into one of those plans than it would be across 3 different options.
Awesome. I have 2 questions that are very similar from 2 folks on the call. So I'll read the first one and kind of mesh in the second one because they kind of go together. He says, I was surprised to hear your suggestion of setting the quarterly rate to 50% of the annual rate. My current setup is 95 annual, 30 a year quarterly. So a fair bit of extra value on annual versus quarterly, though still a far cry from the full amount you mentioned. Would you suggest increasing my quarterly rate up to closer to the 50% mark? And if so, would you suggest making it an increase that affects existing members, or perhaps grandfathering them at the current rate and apply the increased rate to incoming members from that point forward? And Michael, I'll drop it in the chat just in case you want a visual while we're
Got it. Yeah. So, obviously, I knew that most folks coming into the webinar today, they would have all kinds of pricing structures that are probably close to this, and some would have things that are further away from this. If you look at just where long-term quarterly annual pricing, when it comes to best practices for someone who wants to offer only a quarterly and annual plan offering, I think if you're able to bring that quarterly plan price up to the point where it is closer to half of the annual price, two things are going to happen. If you're already offering a quarterly plan today that's less than half the price, you likely are leaving money on the table if you have good retention in that plan. So I'm not suggesting that you should increase price up to the point where you see retention start to decrease, but I'm saying if you have an existing quarterly plan today that performs well and it's a consistent earner for you, then having that quarterly plan be increased in price for new members. I'm not talking about existing members. I'm talking about for new members. If you're going to make the move, let it go into effect for new members and keep your legacy plans the way they are. And then great benefit to that is it lets you measure the long-term trajectory and the long-term performance of those plans as they were. And you can compare that to the plans after you've implemented the change for the new plan. But my recommendation would certainly be is if your quarterly plan is significantly below being priced half of the annual plan, then you likely have some room to not only increase your price, but probably pull out some more value that's hiding in there in terms of your average order value per customer.
Awesome. And here's sort of a follow-up from another customer. When you convert monthly to quarterly, do you allow legacy monthly to keep their plans, or everyone moves? So if you have an existing plan, can those folks just live and breathe and maybe you promote the quarterly plan, or just leave them alone and only apply this for new members?
Yeah, I would only apply it for new members. Unless your move is part of a larger strategy price increase that you have planned. If you're wanting to implement this change as a strategy in and of itself, and you don't have any other plans or ambitions to drive the price higher across the membership as a whole, then I would say introduce pricing for new customers only, and then leave your existing customers on the price points that they remain at. And then two things happen. You're likely going to increase your average order revenue going forward. You're also going to make folks who joined with you earlier under the old pricing feel like they're getting a better deal anyway. So I would always suggest, unless it's part of a larger effort to increase membership prices across the board, to implement the change for new customers only.
Perfect. So I think that answers another one of the last three questions, which was, how would you apply this to a membership with two different tiers with monthly and yearly options? Just remove the monthly for both. So the answer would be yes, leave the people on monthly happily sailing away, and then for new members, offer the quarterly.
Correct. Yeah. If you've got existing monthly members and you're going to remove an existing plan and put a quarterly plan in place of it, keep those members on the monthly plan as they are. I would not transfer them into the quarterly plan. I would let them stay on that tier as they have been.
Perfect. We've got two more questions. This one says, affordability accounts for 1/3 of my current cancellations. How do you propose messaging changing the structure? Would you kick it off with a sale or go straight for the quarterly plan, 50% off annual?
If your survey is suggesting that affordability is a pain point, there's a couple things here. So you can still make this change that we talked about. And what we're focused on is the longer term impact of it. So there, you may have some gyrations and may see some turbulence, but in terms of the change immediately, even if you're to bump that quarterly price or put the quarterly plan into effect and bump the quarterly price up to in the range that we've talked about, one of the things you can do is that by nature of increasing that price on the quarterly plan is that it gives you room to discount off of. So typically what I tell folks who say, I've got affordability issues, or my members are telling me that they have to cancel because of pricing. If they're able to recover those members on the spot with a coupon to apply to their existing membership, by all means, I would go that route. But if you're trying to deal with members who maybe have already churned because of affordability, and maybe you want to win those members back, I think if you sell that member on the existing or your new quarterly plan and discount off of that quarterly plan back into a range that they were either used to paying or below what they were used to paying, you're only gonna extract a lifetime value out of that member that's far greater than you would on a monthly basis or whatever your basis happens to be. So that would be my suggestion.
Thank you for that question. We have two more questions here. Hi, thanks so much for doing this. Thinking about the churn rate discussion, I'm wondering, what have you seen about the effects of offering a low-cost paid trial as an entry point? I've experimented with free trials, no trials, currently a $1 1-month trial. Join now for just $1 for your first month and X amount for a year after, with the idea of lowering the perceived cost of entry, but still requiring people to buy in to move forward. In terms of broad trends, have you seen any particular approach with that to be most optimal in terms of both encouraging new signups and minimizing churn?
Yeah. So thinking about the paid trial, I like paid trials for a few reasons. If someone's willing to pay you $1 for a month or $2 for the first month, they're more likely to convert to the place that you want them to convert to. My suggestion on that conversion flow though would be, if I have a paid trial, I would want my paid trial to be goaled against converting into the quarterly plan. Paid trials tend to convert better into quarterly plans than they do annual plans, and typically that's because you're giving some folks access to a month's worth of content or even a quarter's worth of content. So if the jump between the free trial plan length and the paid full price plan length is significant, it's going to be a much harder point of conversion, rather than if you can have someone pay you a small fee for a month, and if they're happy, stick around for 3 more months. And maybe you could even consider doing a situation where, because they were willing to start a free trial with you, we've also seen a lot of success around someone's in the free trial, and because they're in a free trial, they even get the opportunity to sign up for their first quarter of paid membership at a discounted rate. So I would suggest that if you have folks in a paid trial and the goal is to convert them, don't be afraid to discount those folks on their first paid quarter of membership, even their first paid year. You could try it both ways, but typically, if you can find a way to reward that customer who's already took the first step to trust you and pay you some form of money, then I would say that customer would be more excited to join at a discounted rate on the first term than asking them to pay full price. So it's like a stepping stone. It's just one more thing you can do to let that customer feel like they are appreciated. I have seen lots of examples where folks do a pay trial and they ask folks within 2 or 3 weeks, they offer them the ability to sign up for an annual plan, but the incentive to do so just isn't there. And if you can find a discount strategy and make that, attractive enough, I think you're going to see really good results from converting paid trial members into that quarterly plan.
Awesome. And the part B of that question, then we have only one more, was, and also, what would you consider to be good versus not so good trial conversion rate in terms of considering the trial a successful component?
Yeah. So, trial conversion rates tend to be a lot more unpredictable than, website conversion rates or membership conversion rates. I would personally, if I had a quarterly annual offering and I had a free trial associated with either one of those plans, I would shoot for a minimum of a 3% conversion rate. We've seen folks convert as many as 10% of their free trial members. The interesting part about it is it's less about what they're willing to buy once they're there and where these folks were acquired from. So for example, if it's well qualified traffic, if it's leads that you acquired from a very focused source who are aligned well to your offering, those free trial members are going to convert 10% plus. If it's something where, it's a more general acquisition method and you're just trying to figure out, can I convert people out of a free trial into a paid trial? 2 to 3% would be where I would aim for and I would set a benchmark for. So, but it really comes down to how warm the traffic is that comes into the free trial before you sell them on the paid product.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Michael, we have one last question and then we'll have a few little wrap-ups before we close out the webinar. Last question here for you. Have you seen anyone trying the Substack style super high rate option, i.e. the 10 times annual rate top tier option that maybe includes scholarships for other people and other mystery benefits, as an extra plan choice above the primary two, with the assumption that most people probably won't actually select it, but it would perhaps attract a small number of super supporters?
Yes, I have seen it, and I've seen it work well. However, I have seen it work well where it's offered almost on privately by email versus on the site, pent up against the other two plans. However, if you have folks in your audience that you do feel or you have proof that would be eligible candidates for such a plan, it couldn't hurt because it's priced so much further outside of the core offering that it's truly a special customer that would take to convert into such a plan. And that's okay, with the understanding that 99.9% of folks aren't going to pick that plan. However, what I have seen is that kind of related to this would be the case where even if you wanted to somehow relay more perceived value into the existing plans as they stand today, a lot of folks will deliberately create a plan that has a slight or significant premium on it. So for example, let's say that I know my members are going to sign up for $50 a year. That is the price that generates the most sign up activity. If you're doing a campaign or you're doing a promotion or you're trying to make some form of an impression on new customers or leads, some folks will actually create, I'll call them not dummy plans, but like filler plans where they put the plan on the site, they mark it up. And for example, let's say they create a plan for $75 and then show that plan has been discounted to $50. A lot of folks have experimented with that approach by elevating the price of the plans on the site and then offering folks a discounted rate on a campaign that may be close to what they know the typical sign up activity will occur around. And that typically will perform quite well. In fact, some folks have even seen double the conversions based off of that approach alone. And I know that wasn't your specific question, but on the first part of the question, having a like a superstar tier or something available like that, if it's held up against the others, I don't think it's a problem. I think where the problems come into play is when you have more than two plans that start to compete for space in terms of price that's closely aligned with each other.
Fantastic. That was the last question that we had. So I think with that, we will thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Michael, for all the great info. If you love what you heard and you wanted to give it a second watch, I'll be sending out a recording later on in the week. And further to that, we have a few more webinars in our series coming up. So look out for those invites in your inbox, and we hope to see you at future events. And yeah, just thanks for coming. Thanks for the great questions. It's good to see some familiar names on the list, and we wish you a wonderful afternoon. Michael, lots of thanks for coming through. So
yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks everyone. And another thing I'll add is if anyone wants to circle back with me or has more questions, just shoot me an email, michael@memberful.com. I'm happy to talk through anything that you've got on your mind in terms of what we talked about today. So that's always available.
Wonderful. Thanks again, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we hope to see you at the next one. Ta-ta.